My name's Dashin Grizzly. I'm in Clear Lake, Iowa. Yeah, Clear Lake. I had to double think for a second. I never know. I get in a place, I crash, I get out. And some names are less memorable than others. Clear Lake just doesn't ring any bells in my head for some reason. Anyways, today is Personality 101 Day 2. Agreeableness. It is my favorite trait to talk about. I am most interested in it. And, it seems to have the strongest implications for how people interact with one another. It is the interpersonal trait. When you meet somebody who's very agreeable, they are compassionate, they are loving, they are nurturing. They are likely to go into professions such as teaching, nursing, anything to do with people in a sense where you take care of them, not a customer service sense. People tend to do that begrudgingly, but I suppose somebody high in agreeableness could still join and enjoy that profession. When you think of somebody who's disagreeable, a harsh, blunt, stubborn, and perhaps even cruel in the extreme person may come to mind. When you fractionate agreeableness, you have two specific traits. You have politeness and you have compassion. As far as where women and men fall in the distribution, most women on average score in the realm of 61% agreeableness, and men in between 39 and 41% agreeable, depending where they would fall. Now, there's no political predictive ability within the agreeableness trait, which I find interesting. When you fractionate them, conservatives tend to be more polite, and liberals tend to be more compassionate. Now, when you think of somebody who's agreeable, you don't think of someone who's cruel, usually. You would think of somebody who's disagreeable to be the cruel one. But it really depends on context, because somebody who is extremely agreeable, let's say, is the type of person to fractionate people into victims and oppressors. And the hyper-agreeable person will identify with the victims and see the oppressor as somebody that they can be violent towards or very harsh towards. It's the epitome of becoming a mother grizzly, if you will. Anybody who gets in the way of her cubs will suffer her wrath. And that's the kind of thing a hyper-agreeable person would do in terms of violence. So it's not a very useful way to look at the trait itself to determine, mean person versus nice person. Because nice people, depending on their context, where they fall in a specific moment, can be just as harsh or violent or cruel as the disagreeable person. So, politeness in general, we all know what politeness is, and we all know what compassion is. But when you look at the specific traits, I'm going to have the text on the screen so you can read it if you so choose. So as you can see here, I'm giving stuff away already. I measure in the 0th percentile with politeness, and this may not be a shock to you. So the very polite person will be a people pleaser. They will do things like become a teacher's pet and receive insults for it, but most likely they will benefit for it. They will be the type of person who likes to please their boss, who likes to be hyper-productive, who likes to gain not only the affection of others, but the approval of others. And they do so through what I would, of course, call a fear of conflict, but maybe they just dislike it. They're not interested in the kind of engagements that lead to disharmony. So it's one of those traits where you look at and say, okay, this is interesting. Because when you fractionate agreeableness, like I said, women tend to be more agreeable than men, but if you tried to gain a political affiliation through agreeableness, they cancel out. But it depends on the metric, because when it comes to polite people, conservatives rank higher than liberals, as you may have seen if you paused and read that. But furthermore, After this, there is compassion, which has the opposite political affiliation, which makes a lot of sense. The liberals tend to be more compassionate than conservatives, and we see that every day, if you pay attention. So, up on the screen right now is what compassion entails within the agreeableness realm. Now, compassionate people are the type to love animals, are the type to see something cute and say, oh, that's adorable, are the type to sacrifice their time for others, and as you would see if somebody joined one of the careers I mentioned earlier. And then you have the opposite end of that, the people who aren't compassionate. Now, the exact same thing is true of people who aren't compassionate and of people who aren't polite in a lot of ways. You just take the opposite of what I've basically said, and you have, how should I say, me. Now, one of the really interesting things is, I may have mentioned this in the Personality 101 video, people who are extremely low in agreeableness tend to be all male and all criminal. Now, one of the interesting things about a bell curve is if it falls right on the center and is 50-50, everything's even. But what you see is men on the disagreeable side with their average at 41, and women on the agreeable side with their average at, 60 to 40, basically. Which means as you get lower and lower on the distribution scale, you will have, in this 99th percentile, or rather 0th percentile in this case, you will have all men. And in the 0.1% of women, they're only going to be, for the most part, in between 95 to 97% disagreeable, or really, 3 to 5 percentile. So almost all of the men on the very, very, very far end of the distribution when it comes to being disagreeable are men, and thus criminal. It's the number one predictor for someone being a criminal. Now, there are other interesting things that go along with that. There's the adverse childhood experience study that's been ongoing for God knows how long, and it's basically the kind of thing that Thomas Sowell will point out, or Larry Elder. Larry Elder is the kind of conservative, he's a black conservative, very crazy, but he's a black conservative that basically blames almost anything on a single thing, and that's fatherlessness. Now, fatherlessness predicts disagreeability. I had two fathers. Fatherlessness, well, the things that predict empathy, and the things that are correlated with empathy developing in a child from 0 to 4 are presence of a father in the home. I don't know if that's necessarily a well put forth and accurate metric. Maybe it really should be said a 2-person home. Maybe that's better. But then less predictably, free play in nature. Like, that's strange. No kids get that these days. As far as I can tell anyways. I'm never around children, so I don't really know. But free play in nature and the presence of a father and or a 2-parent household. Whatever the case, the presence of fathers seems to be a great indicator of whether somebody becomes an agreeable person or a disagreeable person. It's also one of these things where it's very biologically determined. Like, there are millions of reasons to be agreeable and millions of reasons to be disagreeable in this world, and all of them can have a behavioral evolution route pointed to them. Disagreeable people aren't naive. Disagreeable people don't in any way get taken advantage of by anybody who's predatory, and that includes potentially themselves. They're not very good at self-manipulation. They are problem solvers for the most part, especially if they're conscientious. If you want to get something done, you talk to a disagreeable, conscientious person, because they're not interested in listening. If you bring a problem to them and don't immediately start looking for a resolution to that problem, they're not going to have it, and they're gonna hit you with some shit so that you get your ass in gear. On the same token, agreeableness is why families can exist. If you look as far back in history into antiquity, it makes all the sense in the world that women would be more agreeable. To have that nurturing thing be inherent within somebody is a huge, huge factor. I don't necessarily know if there are studies done on this, but I would bet so much that people who are disagreeable are far less impacted by neurotransmitters such as oxytocin, which is the chemical that's secreted in your brain. Chemical's not the right word. Neurotransmitter that gets secreted whenever you hear your infant cry, whenever you look at it. Mostly, if you look back into antiquity, so that you don't eat it when there's no food around for a long period of time. So there are reasons for people to be agreeable and to be disagreeable, and they're all valid. And where you fall on the chart can be predicted by a large number of things within your life that don't seem to be directly connected to it, and could almost be determined by how you fill out your About Me section on a Tinder profile. Or at least within the first 10 minutes of the interview stage of a first date or something like that. The seemingly pointless get-to-know-you questions can reveal a lot about this trait automatically. Your temperament can say a lot about this. Small interactions. I feel like I can always predict somebody within 10 percentile where they might fall on the agreeableness scale. But that's probably just my bias because I like it so much. I like thinking about it. When I meet people, I can't help but wonder where they fall on it. Anyways, agreeableness is my favorite trait to talk about it. Oh no, I could go on and on, my friends, but I shall not. Agreeable people, disagreeable people, be you, understand yourself. My name's Dashin Grizzly. I'm in Clear Lake, Iowa, and I'll catch you tomorrow for Personality 101, Conscientiousness. That's a good one too. I like it.